Hello, my name is Dr. Rath, and I will take you in the next 15 minutes through the last 100 years of our history, but he will look at history in a very different light after those 15 minutes. Why am I doing that? I'm a doctor, I'm a scientist, I'm not a historian. For the last 20 years I've been fighting to spread the discoveries, the life-saving discoveries that I've been working for, together with Nobel laureates and my colleagues, against interest groups that are so deeply entrenched that they don't care about health and lives. They just care about one thing: money. So my life is an example. My life's work has been the centerpiece of these interests to be attacked. And I consider it my responsibility to share with you, wherever you are, whatever age you are, this analysis about the last century and who are the driving forces, who have been the driving forces, in fact, for this entire century, that try to control our lives in the area of health and in many other areas. So let's get started. First, we need to look at the largest tragedies that occurred on this planet in the past 100 years. And these were the two world wars, of course. Was it just coincidence? Or were these wars made? Yeah. The answer is they were wars of conquest. Without the economic interests to conquer the world behind this machinery, these wars would never have been fought. And who were those interests? It was a new industry that had just been coming of age. Chemical, pharmaceutical, petrochemical industry. And they had invented a principle how they can recreate nature. They analyzed the molecules, and then they invented a way how they can possess nature through what they call patents. And then the next step was basically to expand this business model of analyzing the molecules of nature and patenting it. And if they expand this business model to the rest of the world, they would literally own this world, as we shall see. So let's have a look at World War I. We are being told that World War I was the outpour of imperial powers fighting each other, the British, the Germans, the French, whatnot. Fact is, World War I was a war that was already predicted 10 years earlier by the chief executive officer of Bayer, the German chemical pharmaceutical company. He called for this war to make the German chemical industry the dominant economic power on this planet. And 10 years later, Emperor Wilhelm II, German Emperor Wilhelm II, he did precisely that. 1914, World War I started. It was this first attempt of the German chemical cartel for world conquest. 4 years earlier, they had invented a technology to create bombs from air. How do they do that? Well, they found a technical method to fixate nitrogen and turn it into ammonium, the basis for TNT. So with that invention, they were able to produce any amount of explosives to conquer the world and making money from it. making bombs from air. And the war was just 1 month old when German Chancellor laid out his plan for the goals of this war. I'm quoting from a book by a historian, Fritz Fischer, Germany's Aims in the First World War. Highly recommendable book. So the so-called September Plan of the German government, published in September 1914, lists under point 4, so the fourth goal of World War I for the German interests was: we must create, listen to this, a Central European Economic Association through common custom treaties to include France, Belgium, Holland, Denmark, Austria-Hungary, Poland, perhaps Italy, Sweden, Norway. This association will not have any common constitutional supreme authority, and all its members will be formally equal, but in practice will be under German leadership and must stabilize Germany's economic dominance over Middle or Central Europe. So it was spelled out very clearly in what interests this World War I was fought. And it cost the lives of more than 20 million people. And it failed. So let's have a closer look at the power behind those chemical companies at that time. There were 3 large chemical companies in Germany at that time: Bayer, BASF and Hoechst. And in order to unite their power, they formed a cartel, first loosely to support World War I, and then in 1926 formally they formed an incorporated, a cartel incorporated, and they called it IG Farben, which means Interest Association for Colors. Farben is the German word for colors. And this is the book they published in 1938, and it is called Products of Our Work. And this is the sign of IG Farben. You could have Bayer, BASF and Hoechst written right there. And let's take a short browse through this book. Before the book even starts, you have this picture here. That is the IG Farben headquarters in Frankfurt. And you surely recognize this flag. So the company was not just a bystander for the Nazi rise to power. They financed it, and they associated their entire organization, more than 80,000 employees, with the war goals of the Nazis. In fact, they gave them the orders. They supplied the Nazis with war essential materials. But why am I leading you through this book? Because what you need to understand is the close association of the IG Farben company with the Nazis. Here you see Adolf Hitler being instructed on new products. Now, what are these products? Well, they essentially cover all areas of life. Here they talk about new dresses, meaning they are not building, they are not making the dresses, they are making the fabrics, and they're patenting these fabrics. So synthetic fabrics was one of their big business. Colors was one of their big business. And here they even take pride on showing a tree. They say here is carbon and water, and what we do from those materials, we make a central molecule called acetylene, and from there we can make everything. Synthetic fabrics, we can make synthetic rubber, we can make colors, we can make movie materials, we can make drugs, we can make fertilizers, pesticides, and many other areas that are just synthetically being brought together. And looking at this page here, they even invented the term chemotherapy at that time, a term that is today associated with one of the greatest tragedies of human life, the use of chemotherapy for cancer, the doubtful use. Then here they talk about herbicides, toxic chemicals that in great part have been banned because of the side effects. Then a few pages further on they talk about producing film cameras and films, and they even talk about producing synthetic gasoline. And lastly, as I mentioned before, fixating nitrogen from air to produce not just fertilizers but also bombs. So there wasn't really any part of society, any products that anyone could buy who was not in some way, directly or indirectly, making money for IG Farben cartel, for Bayer, BASF and Höchst. And World War II came 1 year after this promotional piece was published. By the time when it was published, IG Farben was already in Berlin advising the German government on which countries to invade first because of the raw materials, because of the chemical companies to rob. So World War II came the second attempt at world conquest. We're being told World War II was a racial war led by some lunatics against Jewish people and other minorities. The economic driving force was Bayer, BASF, Höchst and the IG Farben cartel. So let's have a closer look at the war plans behind this conquest war. This is a book called The General Plan East, which was the official terminology for conquering Eastern European countries, from Latvia down to Bulgaria and Greece, and later on Ukraine and of course Soviet Union. The plan failed, but it was spelled out in detail how they would conquer and how the new conquered territories would be named. It was not destruction that was the war game, it was conquest. And the way these newly conquered territories would be administered is being specified in some statements that SS Chief Heinrich Himmler made about the people living in those conquered countries, meaning basically the rest of the world. I'm quoting: "A fundamental question is education and thereby the selection of the youth. For the people in the East, there must not be any school at all, beyond the primary school with 4 grades. The goal of this primary school has to be simple calculations until maximally the number 500, and writing of their names. Further, the instruction that it is a divine law to obey the Germans, be honest, industrious and obedient. Reading capabilities are not necessary. Beyond this primary school, there must not be any type of school in the conquered countries." So they were ready to create vassal states, conquered states, where they keep people as subhuman individuals. That was the conquest plan of Bayer, BASF, Höchst, and the military and political puppets they had hired, namely the Nazis. Am I going too far with what I'm saying? Let's have a look at what happened after World War II. There were the Nuremberg war crime tribunals. You may have heard about the main one. Probably you have not heard about Tribunal number 6, which was against 24 executives of Bayer, BASF, Höchst and IG Farben. This is a summary book about this tribunal. It's published by the Office of the Military Government for Germany, United States, Finance Division, Financial Investigation Section. And it states, it specifies on many pages how widespread the network of conquest, not just from land was, but from companies. Here are pages after pages, international direct and indirect companies that were affiliated with IG Farben through World War I. And it goes to Africa, and it lists a dozen African countries, and goes to Asia, it lists 24 Asian countries, it goes to Australia, it goes to Europe. In Europe, of course, there are several dozens of companies, all controlled directly or indirectly by the chemical pharmaceutical cartel IG Farben, that is Bayer, Höchst, BASF. And of course they also list the patents that were being robbed by IG Farben from those countries. And again, these are documents showing from the newspaper that IG Farben company produced the visit of Adolf Hitler in the company with the entire management of IG Farben. This is the company headquarters in Frankfurt. This plant here is IG Auschwitz, which made Auschwitz known the world over because the slave labor needed to construct this plant led to the professionalization of the Auschwitz concentration camp, to turn it from a slave labor camp into a mass murder extermination camp. So it's all on record. And if you want to know more details, we've published 50,000 pages from this tribunal against IG Farben, war crime tribunal against the chemical cartel Bayer, BASF and Höchst, online for free for the world to know, after this information had been hidden away for more than 6 decades. Why? How much money did it cost for the cartel to wipe out, or try to wipe out, its criminal record? Some of the executives were actually sentenced as war criminals in the Nuremberg Tribunal. Fritz Termeer, the CEO of Bayer, received 7 years in prison for genocide, which means mass murder, slavery, robbery. A few years later, he was released. And guess what? Which position did he assume after being released from prison as a war criminal? He became chairman of the board of Bayer Incorporated in Germany after World War II. And that brings us to the present day. The Brussels EU. You may have heard about this construct. You may think this is a democratic institution and that it has the best interests. Well, you have to have a closer look at what it is. We published a book called The Nazi Roots of the Brussels EU. In it, we document that actually the architects of the Brussels EU were the same technocrats that planned the conquest of Europe and the world for the Nazis. The main name that you will come across, his name is Walter Hofstein, a professor of economic law, who gave a speech before World War II where he outlined how the Nazis would administer the conquered countries. In 1938, he was in Italy negotiating with the Italian Mussolini government how Italy and Germany together would manage the new world order. 20 years later, the same man was again in Rome. This time he was signing the foundation treaty for the Brussels EU. We found the documents that list this man as a die-hard Nazi, and they're published in this book. For example, he was member of the National Socialist, meaning the Nazi Alliance of Protectors of the Law, which was a terminology for the guys who were pulling the strings for the administrative law in the conquered countries. And there were other associations where you think a man like that should have ended up in prison. How did he escape this fate? Well, we also found the questionnaire he filled out for the so-called denazification protocol of the Allies. And in it he just lies about just everything of his past, on record. And that man was the first president of the Brussels EU for 10 years. He had at his disposal 8,000 technocrats to build what is today known as the Brussels EU. You may think you're voting for this thing. There are 600 and somewhat seats in the EU Parliament, and there are more than 50,000 paid technocrats at the disposal not of the Parliament, but of the EU Commission, which is the executive level, actually the government. They can make laws without even the Parliament being involved. The Parliament, in fact, has no right to initiate any legislation, a hallmark of any democracy. So what we see here is that the Brussels EU is nothing else than the third attempt of world conquest. The Brussels EU is the platform for expanding the very same interests, the chemical pharmaceutical cartel, namely from Germany, but also from other countries, to establish world dominance. How do they do that? Well, first of all, they talk the African continent into, hey, why don't you guys copy our successful model of the Brussels EU? And suddenly we have an African Union with a seat in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia, with an African Union Commission. No one voted for that either. And the second trick they use to get influence and expand their influence around the world is so-called free trade zones. So right now they're negotiating with the United States of America for a free trade zone between Europe and the United States. President Obama is ill-advised for inviting these interests that were responsible for 2 world wars to basically enter the White House, and from here on for generations to come co-govern what once was known as a democracy, as a beacon of democracy in the world, the United States of America. If President Obama allows that to happen, he will go into history as the undertaker of democracy after 200 and somewhat years of existence of the United States of America. But that's not all. This free trade zone thing is being propelled by Merkel, Angela Merkel, the current Chancellor of Germany, and others around the world, including South America, the Caribbean, Southeast Asia, etc. What it means is not just that products are coming into your country more freely. What it means, any country that signs a free trade agreement with these interests will actually allow their societies to be controlled by the very same interests who were behind World War I and World War II. It will condemn every country that signs a free trade agreement with these interests, will condemn the people of these countries to pay tribute by just about any product they touch for the rest of their lives to these interests without even knowing it. Every product that is synthetically made, they pay tribute to these interests every day. And that money is desperately needed for other things. I'm coming to an end. Currently they try to boost the Brussels EU into something democratic. The president of the current EU Commission, the pro forma head of the Brussels government, Manuel Barroso, he came up with a brilliant idea. He said, we need a federal Europe, the federal states of Europe. And he was praising it as a brilliant idea of himself and his commission. Well, a closer look into the books of history tells us that we've seen this scheme before. This is a book written by no other than Walter Hallstein, The Uncompleted Federal State. It was published in 1968, 1969, and I'm reading just 2 sentences. We need a federal constitution. The conception I'm sketching here, he writes, is from an unprecedented audacity. Even lawyers have their breath taken away from my idea of creating the federal states of Europe under the control of the cartel. So I encourage all of you to deepen your knowledge about those facts, no matter where you live. If you live in Europe, you have a particular interest. If you are a young person, your future in Europe will be dim if you allow these interests to continue building their dictatorship in all areas of society without you having any chance of interfering. You cannot vote those guys, the EU Commission, out of office. You just don't have the right. Is this democracy? And if you live in another part of this world where these tentacles of this octopus are reaching out, trying to strangulate those countries too, watch out. You should know the history of those colonial powers that were active for centuries around the world. They were responsible for World War I and World War II as conquest wars. And that now again, for the very same purpose of controlling every piece of life on this planet, are reaching out to you. Familiarize yourself with the historical fact by visiting the websites that you've seen, by reading this book, The Nazi Roots of the Brussels EU, online, and above all, by joining us in the movement of life, in whatever capacity you can, wherever you live, to number one, alert your fellow citizens about these historical facts, and number two, tell them, not again. They've done it twice before, not this time.